There are nights that don't end at sunrise. They seep into memory, refuse to fade, and leave behind an echo, a question that resonates in the silence of the years. For the Mann family, that night happened on June 19, 1978. They didn't come home with a simple travel story. They came back with a hole in reality. An entire hour, 60 minutes of their lives was torn from the clock, replaced by a fog of confusion and an unsettling feeling that they were no longer alone in the universe. This isn't just a story about a light in the sky. It's the chronicle of a road that shouldn't exist, of memories buried under fear, and of a truth so extraordinary it had to be excavated from the depths of the mind. What really happened to the Mann family on that stretch of darkness in the quiet English countryside? The answer begins where their memories end. The night of June 19, 1978, enveloped the A417 highway in England with the tranquility typical of the countryside. Inside the car, the atmosphere was familiar. John Mann was driving, his wife Gloria beside him, and in the back seat, their young daughters, 5-year-old Natasha and 3-year-old Tanya, shared the space with Frances, John's sister. The drive home, after a day with their parents, should have been routine, marked only by the drowsiness of the children and the monotony of the asphalt. But the routine was broken by an anomaly in the sky, a light, too bright to be a star, too defined to be a plane. It seemed to follow them, a silent watchman in the dark expanse. Curiosity, a force as old as fear itself, made John pull the car over. He needed to understand. As he stepped out of the vehicle, the silence of the night was the only answer. The light had vanished. Then the impossible manifested. Directly ahead of them, appearing like a phantom in the darkness, a massive, ball-shaped craft materialized. It hovered for an instant, a colossal apparition against the stars, before gliding to the right and dipping below the tree line. For a brief moment, the family could see a ring of colored lights on its edge, a silent, hypnotic vision. The silence was then shattered by a sound that did not belong to this world, a high-pitched whistle, mixed with a metallic screech of train wheels on tracks. John, paralyzed, watched the craft pulse up and down, as if seeking a place to land. It was Gloria's scream that broke him from his trance. Fear overcame curiosity. He leapt back into the car and sped away, fleeing from something his mind still refused to process. The escape, however, did not lead them back to their known reality. It took them somewhere even stranger. The road, a path John knew like the back of his hand, became unrecognizable. It seemed narrower, flanked by high, dense hedges that suffocated the landscape where open fields should have been. There was no wrong turn, no alternate route. It was the same road, but it had been rewritten by an unseen force. The route, which should have been straight and flat, now contorted into curves and undulations that defied the local geography. A sense of unreality overcame all the adults. It felt like floating, like being trapped in a lucid dream with no control. John felt he could take his hands off the steering wheel and his feet off the pedals, and the car would continue on its course, guided by a will that was not his own. Stretches of the road seemed to repeat, creating an endless labyrinth. And all the while,
The light in the sky, which had returned, continued to follow them, a constant presence on their hallucinatory journey. Finally, as if a spell was broken, a turn delivered them back to the real world. They were approaching the town of Farringdon, and the road was familiar once more. The light in the sky vanished as they crossed the urban area, only to reappear, stubborn and watchful, as soon as they were back on the open road. The phenomenon only ceased for good when they passed the town of Cirencester. The rest of the trip was made in a tense silence, each adult lost in the maze of their own bewilderment.
Upon arriving home, the strangeness of the night took on a concrete, irrefutable dimension. The clock reads past midnight, almost 1 a.m. The trip, which never took more than an hour and a half, had taken nearly twice as long. An entire hour of their lives had simply been erased. They looked at each other, and the same question was in everyone's eyes. What happened in that missing time? Still shaken, John refused to leave the mystery unanswered. He called the Royal Air Force Base at Brize Norton, inquiring about experimental flights or any unusual aerial activity in the region. After checks were made, the answer was negative and definitive. There was nothing in the skies that night. No official explanation, no logical answer. Exhausted, John and Gloria went to bed, but sleep brought no relief. About an hour later, both were abruptly awakened. The same sound, that metallic whistle they had heard on the road, was now directly over their house. John rushed to the window, but the moment he looked, the sound ceased instantly, leaving only silence and a starry sky. The experience hadn't ended on the road. Something had followed them home. The days that followed turned the experience into a physical and psychological invasion. The three adults, John, Gloria, and Francis, began to develop intensely itchy skin rashes. And even stranger, they all discovered a perfectly defined bruise below their right knee, a mark for which they had no explanation. The event of that night was no longer just a confusing memory, it was etched onto their bodies. While the adults dealt with the physical evidence, the barrier of forgetfulness began to crumble in little Natasha's mind. The 5-year-old girl started to be tormented by vivid nightmares. She would wake up crying, talking about strange people with funny eyes who examined her and took her parents to another room. The images were sharp, recurring. In an attempt to calm her, her mother, Gloria, tried to explain it was just a bad dream. Natasha's response was a whisper that sent a chill down her mother's spine. "You should know. You were there too." In that moment, the family understood. These were not nightmares. They were fragments of memory, emerging from the mind of a child, the only one who perhaps hadn't received the full dose of forgetting. Frances, the aunt, also confessed to having similar dreams, in which she saw herself being examined in a strange room. The truth was there, buried under a layer of forced amnesia, screaming to be heard. They needed help. That's when they decided to contact UFO investigators, taking the first step to unravel what really happened in the hour that was stolen from them. The key to the missing time was locked inside their own minds. The investigator, Frank Johnson, upon hearing about the amnesia, suggested the only tool that could possibly unlock those memories: regressive hypnosis. John and Francis agreed, driven by a desperate need for answers. Gloria, afraid of what she might relive, refused to participate and to subject her daughters to the process. Under the guidance of the hypnotherapist, the barriers of consciousness were lowered, and the full story of that night began to emerge, piece by piece, from separate minds, but
with frightening consistency. The memory began the moment the car stopped. A thick, anomalous fog enveloped the vehicle as the craft landed ahead of them. Tall figures wearing silver suits and helmets that concealed their faces surrounded the car. Then, a beam of light descended from the ship. It wasn't aggressive, it was an elevator. One by one, the family was lifted from the ground, floating gently up into the craft through an opening in its base. Little Natasha, in her memories that would later surface, remembered looking down and seeing one of the beings turn off the engine and lights of the family car. Inside, they found themselves in a gigantic circular room. They were greeted by humanoid beings, tall, with short blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. A voice which spoke directly in their minds explained that they would be examined to compare human biology with their own, and afterward, all their questions would be answered. There would be no pain, no harm. John was taken to a room that looked like a mix between a doctor's office and the control panel. In the center was a chair resembling a dentist's. A being who introduced itself telepathically as Anxia explained that the ship was controlled by a central computer. John was instructed to sit, and a beam of light scanned him from head to toe. Afterward, Anxia gave him a tour of the ship, showing him the engine room, which operated with a kind of high-voltage static electricity generator, and the navigation room. At John's request, Anxia showed him on a screen the path back to their planet. The journey started at Earth, passed through our solar system, and traveled at an unimaginable speed to a planet with 2 moons, Janos. In a separate room, Frances had a parallel experience. She too was placed in a chair and examined. In her initial panic, a wave of telepathic calm soothed her. After the examination, which lasted about 20 minutes, she was informed that the main difference between humans and them was our faster heart rate, likely due to fear of the situation. She was then taken to a sort of common area where she met a pilot named Uklaiya. Uklaiya told the same story. He was from Janos, a planet 7,000 light-years from Earth, a journey that, for them, took only 2 Earth years. He showed Frances images of his world before a cataclysm. Janos had once been green and fertile, but a meteor shower hit nuclear power plants, triggering a chain reaction that devastated the planet, forcing the survivors to live underground. Now, they were searching for a new home, and Earth was a possibility. Their mission was to see if they could adapt to life here. The most peculiar memory came from Natasha. Without hypnosis, she recalled details the adults hadn't. She remembered small beings with large eyes, in addition to the tall humanoids. While the adults were being examined, she and her sister stayed with an alien named Achilles, who showed them images of other planets and their inhabitants on a screen. Creatures the girl described as monsters, and hairy men who lived in caves. At the end of the experience, before being returned to the car, the family was reunited. They were offered a drink with the explanation that it would help them forget, for their own safety and that of the aliens. Natasha tasted it but didn't like the fishy flavor and didn't drink it all. Perhaps because of this, her memories remained closer to the surface. The final promise from the beings of Janos was that they would meet again. Seconds later, the memory would break. The next conscious scene was of the family, back in the car, already on the road, with the clock reading an hour later, and their minds and inexplicable void.
The Mann family's case could be dismissed by skeptics as a mass hallucination, a shared dream, or the influence of science fiction, so popular at the time with films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But their story didn't happen in a vacuum. In 1978, something strange was happening in the skies over England, and the Mann family's account was just one chapter in a much larger chronicle. Just 4 months earlier, in February, more than 168 miles away in Devon, a woman known only as Mrs. G had a terrifyingly similar experience. While in her backyard, a blue light enveloped her, and a beam lifted her off the ground. She found herself before 3 tall figures in metallic suits, the same descriptions given by the Manns. She also felt a telepathic message of calm before receiving a sharp blow to the back of her neck and finding herself back in her yard with an hour of missing time. And the pattern would repeat. Months later, in December, the Day family in Averley, Essex, reported being taken from their car by beings of the same description. In a pre-internet era, without the instant communication we have today, it was virtually impossible for these families living in distant, rural locations to have known about each other. Yet, they described the same method of abduction, the same tall blonde beings, the same message of a dying planet, and the same telepathic technology. These were 3 independent events weaving together a tapestry of contact that suggested not an isolated incident, but an ongoing operation. The story of the Mann family leaves us at a crossroads between the extraordinary and the inexplicable. On one hand, we have the consistent account from multiple family members, corroborated by hypnosis and a child's memories. We have physical evidence, like the marks and rashes. And crucially, we have a pattern, echoes of the same event happening to other people in other places during the same period. On the other hand, we have doubt, the resemblance to other famous cases, and the possibility of the human mind filling gaps with fantastic narratives. But when a story is told with such detail by so many voices and mirrors other unconnected stories, where do we draw the line between dream and testimony? The Manns didn't just see a light in the sky. They were touched by it, had their minds and bodies examined, and their time stolen. They came back with a story about a people from the stars looking for a new beginning, a story that, whether true or not, forever changed the way they looked at the night sky. Is there any piece of this puzzle that, for you, is the key to it all? The consistency between the accounts, or the vivid memories of little Natasha? Leave your perspective in the comments. Every like is a signal flare to the YouTube algorithm, showing that the exploration of mysteries like this must continue. It's the support that drives us to go deeper into the next case.